Today I'd like to discuss Season 1 of Telltale's Batman. From a very different perspective than what you might find online, this is not going to be a strictly speaking video game review. What this is going to be is me discussing my playthrough of Season 1 of Telltale's Batman and just kind of going over the storytelling elements that I like and some of them that I don't like as much, and everything in between. The whole result of this video, honestly, is a happy accident because when I was trying to play Season 2 Batman the Enemy Within, which I haven't gotten to play yet because for some reason my original save file from Season 1 couldn't be imported into Season 2. So then I was just thinking, well shit, I guess I'm going to replay Season 1, and I was dragging my feet on that for a little bit. But once I started playing that again, I was having a really good time with it. I guess that's what really was the impetus for this video, so I gotta thank it for that, because the more I thought of it, the more I just kind of wanted to go into this perspective. So everything from here that I'm going to be discussing is going to have two things you should take into account. One, spoiler alert for Season 1, obviously. And two, this is all going to be coming from my perspective, meaning everything that I'm talking about is based on the choices I made within the game. So if I'm criticizing something about the game, it's pretty much mostly going to be based on the choices I made. Now, obviously, there could be a counter of like, well, if you chose this, that wouldn't be as much of a problem. Sure, but for the sake of this is every praise and every critique is based on how I played the game, since, you get the choice and there's a branching narrative of sorts. So let's just keep that in mind as we go forward. Now, the first thing that popped out to me when I was playing this game, and it's something that I really like about Telltale, and it's something very different in comparison to just about any other superhero video game out there. This is the game that really puts you into that classic hero's double life. There hasn't been many video games out there that deal with the civilian identity of the hero. They want to deal with the super aspects, which I perfectly understand. If you're Superman, you're going to want to go like 5,000 miles an hour flying, use heat vision, freeze breath and such, and it might be more difficult to come up with like a compelling level with Clark Kent that doesn't feel annoying back in the day. But since Telltale's shtick is their best elements usually aren't the action, their best elements in terms of gameplay tend to be those dialogue trees where you have these really intense discussions with characters, and they can have little ramifications on how people perceive you. And that might be a bigger deal down the road when there is an action set piece and something important is going to happen. That's Telltale's strength, so it's really cool to see them bring that touch to a superhero property like Batman. While Batman works great with something like Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, having that double life is really refreshing in a video game, I guess I should say, long story short. And what's really cool, especially about that when you're playing through this, is you can approach the Batman and Bruce Wayne dynamic from a particular point of view. For example, like how I was approaching the Batman-Bruce Wayne dynamic is that I wanted to try and replicate as best as I can, because, there's not an option for every take on Batman you want. But if you wanted to be closer to the Frank Miller, grizzled Batman, you could do that. There are certain points where you could really brutalize someone if you want to. My take on Batman was more of the dark vigilante who will go after criminals and definitely be tough on them. But he tries to intimidate them more than absolutely brutalize them. And then especially when it comes down to cops, very respectable towards them. Even when the Vale murders happen, you encounter the child and you have the opportunity to scare the information out of him. I chose the compassionate route, since that's the take on Batman that I'm used to. We're all used to the really high-end, overly dark and gritty Batman, but my favorite Batman is a Batman with a little bit more compassion to him. And that is a pretty good dynamic, especially when you're going with some of the darker aspects when he's intimidating criminals, but he's not always that. And then with my Bruce Wayne, I tried my best, and the dialogue options that I was at least seeing didn't seem to have as much of this take, and I can understand it just for the sake of the main plot being the Bruce Wayne element is Bruce helping Harvey to fund his campaign, so he has to be taken a little seriously. But I was trying my best to kind of bring about that playboy billionaire aspect, and there are some little bits where you can crack a joke about wine, or You can kind of play dumb about a couple of things. And I tried to do that a little bit here and there just to kind of believably throw off people to, not thinking that this guy is somehow Batman. Like, that's kind of the perspective I tried to be when I was, like, Bruce Wayne in the public eye. And then, when it's, like, one-on-one with, like, Selina or Alfred or Lucius or something like that, then, he's a little more open and maybe a little bit more intense. But that was kind of the dynamics that I was specifically bringing to my take on the Batman Bruce Wayne interpretation. And what I like so much about the Telltale version is just that, if you wanted to go for that type of dynamic, you can. Like, you can choose whether to, like, suit up as Batman more or to try and solve issues as Bruce Wayne, trying to talk information out instead of intimidate it. Specifically, whenever there was a chance for me to be Batman, I was going to be Batman because, in my take on the character, in terms of the video game, not like writing, is that Batman's the real person and Bruce Wayne is the mask. Now, there have been all kinds of discussions back and forth over whether Batman's the mask that Bruce Wayne puts on or vice versa. But it is really cool that in gameplay, you can do that for yourself. You can determine whether there's one or the other and which one is the dominant persona. Another thing that I appreciate about Telltale is their willingness to shake up the formula, so to speak. Pretty much everyone knows what a standard Batman story is going to look like, and even if you introduce changes to it, like, various, like, okay, you can choose to do this or that, that's perfectly fine, and, like, a lot of people would have fun with that too, myself included, but they're not held to the same canon as, like, the comics, and they use that, for the most part, to their benefit. A few examples that come to mind include the friendship between Bruce and Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin. That was a nice little element that definitely isn't in the comics, but it works really well for the story they're telling here and the journey that Penguin goes on. There's also the fact that Catwoman figures out that you're Batman the very second that Selina and Bruce first meet out of costume. And that is such a ballsy thing, an unexpected thing to pull off in episode 1 of this series. It's crazy, like I didn't see that coming, but it is awesome. That was just a nice little element of like, okay, so we're definitely not afraid to play around with this some more. And because of that, it does lead to some different type of storytelling opportunities than if we tried to do the 100% standard take on these Batman characters. And then there's also the fact that Vicky Vale winds up being the main villain. I'm going to have a lot more to say on that later. But if we're just talking about the pure reveal twist of that, that is like, oh shit, I definitely did not see that coming. Good on you for fooling me there. I should have known it was coming, but good on you. And the last one is the fact that Thomas Wayne was in bed with the Falcones and was an incredibly corrupt businessman in charge of Arkham Asylum and putting away a bunch of people. And interestingly enough, I get the feeling, and this is just speculation, but given the fact that he committed a bunch of people wrongly to being insane, this could also lead to that classic argument of like, okay, did Batman create Gotham or did Gotham create Batman? Well, Gotham might have created Batman in this world, given that there's a chance that Thomas Wayne could have just like institutionalized a bunch of Batman's rogues before they were his rogues. And that's fascinating if they're going to go in that direction. Because that'd be a brilliant device to just explain a whole bunch of people just coming out of the woodwork in Season 2 if that's the direction they go in. The fact that they're willing to shake up all of those things makes it a little bit more unpredictable. And that's what I like about it. They don't have to conform once again to the continuity, and it really does work out for them most of the time. Plus, it definitely involves Alfred more in the story, and the dialogues with him get really intense and personal, and I really dig those too. After that, we've got ourselves the romantic element, which I think is something that Telltale tends to do pretty well from what I've played of their games. Walking Dead Season 1 kind of teased a little bit of a romantic element that definitely swerves you. But this one, you kind of get to pursue a romantic-like element with Batman and Catwoman to where if you choose to go down it, which I did because I'm a sucker for a good romance. Sorry, it's just, when it's well done, I really enjoy it. And the way that they handled the Bruce and Selina segments was perfectly within their characters. And it makes it really interesting, especially given that like Selena figures out his identity so early on. It leads to a really fun back and forth between them. Like the bar fight that they have with a bunch of goons and them working together, there was like such a cool amount of chemistry there. And then just even like Bruce slowly kind of eroding Selena is just kind of like, oh, I'm just here to steal stuff. I don't care about anything. And you can kind of tell near the end of the episode 5 that he's kind of gotten to her a little bit. You know, she might not be like 100% of a hero, but she's definitely not as much of a villain as she's making herself out to be. And I really did enjoy that dynamic. I get the feeling it's going to show up in season 2, especially since even in episode 5 they were doing the Selena will remember that notations that they do with like a really important dialogue tree. You say they'll say like, oh, someone noticed that, or they'll remember that. And that was a cool little bit. Overall, I was happy with it. There is a downside also resulting in that, but we'll get to that in a second as well. So we're just going to table that. So I mentioned this a little bit with the willingness of Telltale to shake this up, but their villain interpretations are by and large incredibly interesting. The characters that get the best treatment for this are Penguin, Two-Face, and Joker. Penguin is a really conniving villain, kind of like he always is in the comics, but the personal element of Bruce and Oswald being friends adds an extra layer to it, to where, you know, at least at first in my interpretation of it, Bruce has some hesitation to go after Oswald just given their past, but then that quickly turns into animosity when, you know, he completely takes the company out from under Bruce and starts using the funds to do all these awful things. Also, just on a side note, I just love it, the fact that Penguin wears a penguin mask. Like, is that really the first time anyone has ever done that? I don't necessarily need to see that in the comics or anything, but like for some reason, that mask is awesome. And honestly, Penguin could have been the main villain of this game. At the start of episode 1, it feels like he's a much bigger deal than he winds up becoming. He's much more of a personal threat for Bruce than like the big cityscape threat. But like, I don't know, for some reason, episode 1, it does feel like, oh man, Penguin's going to be this huge, huge deal. And he's still good, but just not quite as big as he could have been. Then we have Two-Face, and this is where I'm really curious to see the differences. Like, I want to go through gameplay videos of this to see where this shakes out, if there is much of a difference at all. So, Harvey Dent is your friend at the start of the game. And, you know, like any Batman story, when you see Harvey Dent, it's like, okay, he's going to be Two-Face eventually. And I like how they give little coy references to like, okay, oh, a new face to Gotham, or there's some other line that's kind of like a wink wink nudge nudge, and I kind of like that stuff. That's nice little foreshadowing. And there's a point in episode 2 that I just freaking loved, where Penguin goes out onto stage while Mayor Hill and Dent are having a debate in the mayoral election, and he injects them both with this drug that, you know, gets rid of your inhibitions. Between that and Harvey getting his face scarred in my take, because I'm kind of an asshole to admit this, but like, I want Two-Face. Two-Face is my favorite Batman villain, so when you give me the sadistic choice of save Selena and save Two-Face, I chose to save Selena because I want Two-Face. I know, I'm an asshole, but like, Two-Face, like I said, is one of my favorite villains. So he wins the race by default, and he gets to be mayor as he's going through his Two-Face transformation. And it's really cool seeing him go really hardline after the Children of Arkham, which is this terrorist organization led by Vicky, and releasing all these drugs that make people go crazy and kill each other. Harvey's going really hardline on the opposite end, trying to quell them up. And there's a great scene with Batman and Harvey, to where Harvey explodes a building where the Children of Arkham were keeping their drug supplies, and just like killed a bunch of cops doing it too. And he's like, that's fine, it's for the greater good kind of thing. I like that because it seems to come from that place of helplessness that Two-Face is birthed from. It seems to be that the combination of the drug injection, watching Mayor Hill get killed right in front of him, not being able to do anything, and then getting scarred by Penguin and not being able to do anything, is what birthed Two-Face. That is fascinating. And then seeing his mental state deteriorate all the way up through episode 4 was a pretty interesting thing. Like, he could have been the main villain as well. Either him or Penguin probably should have been the main villain, because that was some really interesting personal dynamics for both Bruce Wayne and Batman to deal with. And I think it was overall very effective. Where I think it does take a bit of a hit, because Two-Face has some problems that Penguin doesn't necessarily have, and I guess I'll knock out Joker real quick. This Joker's really interesting, because Joker also seems to, right out the gates, know you're Batman. I'm getting the feeling season 2 will follow up on that, but like, this take on Joker is really interesting. There's not much to him yet. He is definitely Joker, but he seems to be like one of the more accepted patients in Arkham, and no one seems to know his name or when he even got there. And like, fan theory, but maybe he was like one of Thomas Wayne's prototype patients. I don't know. That could work. Just had to throw Joker in there real quick. So Two-Face, his progression is really good, but there are two small elements, ironically enough, that could have been handled better, in my opinion. Number one, the coin literally comes out of nowhere. Like, he literally just starts flipping a coin, and like, it's like, okay, well, this is something that Two-Face does, right? So he's just gonna start flipping a coin when he starts to lose his mind. It might have been cool if, like, you established that the coin was always there, to kind of maybe show that there was a little bit of something boiling up to the surface, because the whole point of the drug in the game is that it boils up, you know, stuff that's already there. So that could be cool if, like, the drug boiled that up to 11, and then he's really literally using the coin to come up with all of his decisions. But at least with this, the coin just kind of comes out of nowhere, because that's Two-Face's thing. It's not really set up, it just shows up. The second half of the game just kind of does that in a couple points. Sometimes I give him that break, but I don't know, for Two-Face, like, you could have taken a second or two to establish that. The other thing that maybe it's only a big deal in my playthrough. Take this with a grain of salt. Feel free to answer in the comments if you can answer this for me definitively, if this is always going to happen. Harvey's exact mental break, at least the way my gameplay had it, because he was kind of not in the best of mental health after the scarring, of course, but the thing that really sets him over the edge is the fact that he catches me and Selina in her apartment. And Harvey apparently loves Selina so much that he just goes on a full mental break with Two-Face. And don't get me wrong, I like the choice of either fighting Harvey or just letting him wear down and, you know, not fighting your friend. That's a good choice out of context. I think the issue is that it feels very love triangle-y in a way that The Dark Knight, the film, magically somehow was able to make a love triangle not feel just like bad fiction writing. And this just kind of feels like a typical place to go. Like, oh no, you're sleeping with this person that I love so much. And it's, I don't know. It doesn't quite work as far as like of all the things to like break Harvey mentally, that is the thing that does it. And I know that he's probably already been in a fragile mental state, so it probably isn't going to take much to get him there. So I understand that. That part just felt awkward to me. Other than that, though, like I said, he's also a fantastic villain in this series, and I look forward to seeing him in Season 2. I really hope he does show up there. And while we're talking about villains, let's talk about Vicky Vale for a second, shall we? Now, Vicky Vale is an interesting case for Telltale, because on one hand, they pulled off a twist really well. I honestly did not see coming when Vicky Vale turned out to be Lady Arkham behind the Children of Arkham. I don't even mind the backstory to her of how she got to that point. But ultimately, Vicky Vale has a bit of Talia al Ghul syndrome to her. Now, mind you, she isn't quite as bad as Talia in the sense of I didn't see her coming as the main villain, while in the case of Dark Knight Rises, when I was watching that film, I was just waiting for the entire time, okay, when are you going to be Talia? When are you going to be Talia? When are you going to be Talia? That's a little bit of a different case, but at the same time, it is an instance where her being the main villain detracts from the other interesting villains in the piece. Like, you have Penguin and Two-Face, who are both very complex and personal villains for both Bruce Wayne and Batman to deal with. And Vicky sort of has that. You get to interact with Vicky as Bruce Wayne a couple of times, sort of, and you get to see some of Vicky as Lady Arkham, sort of, though pet peeve about that, really funny pet peeve about that, I love how we waited to call her Lady Arkham until after it was revealed. Like, we literally just were saying the leader or the Children of Arkham's leader and things like that. It wasn't until after the reveal happened that then we magically just started calling her Lady Arkham. Also, just plain fact of the matter, given the drug itself that is mostly throughout the first 4 episodes of this game, that really should have been Scarecrow. Like, that is like a compound that Scarecrow really would come up with. And maybe if we want to call her Scarecrow in there, that's fine. But I guess the big issue is that we are told a lot about her, but we just don't get to see much of her as a villain. And what I do see of her as a villain is nowhere near as complex or interesting to me as Penguin or Two-Face or Joker. She's just kind of crazy and is just like, I'm gonna make everyone pay for stuff, and including the Waynes and all the powerful people and this, and it's like, that's fine, that's a perfectly acceptable plot. It's just, when I get to that final fight with Vicky, and I'm having those dialogue discussions with Vicky as Lady Arkham, I am not as invested in that encounter as I was in episode 4 when I'm fighting Two-Face in Wayne Manor, or I'm having that discussion with Penguin when I'm trying to distract him from finding Commissioner Gordon. Those were both really nice, thrilling encounters with some suspense. And there is a bit of that with Alfred when she captures him, and that part's pretty good, but it's just not there with her. And unfortunately, what that results in is that the main plot kind of fizzles out a little bit by episode 5, while the subplots flourish throughout most of the series. Which, I mean, doesn't make for like an awful experience. It's something I'd replay it, another time. I wouldn't mind replaying it another time. It's just that, unfortunately, at the end of the day, you're having this big old fight with Vicky, and it's meant to be this big thing, and I just don't care. And then what also doesn't help is, and this is honestly a serious question, like, I really need to know this in the story, where the shit does she get that tech? Like, that massive stun staff and shit? Like, and I know it's kind of a dumb question to ask, right? It's kind of like asking, where does Joker and Two-Face get all those goons, right? Like, it's kind of along those lines. But especially since we're going in that direction, we're really pushing to make Vicky the villain, we really should have gotten the explanation of how the shit she got, like, the Iron Man-esque repulsor boots, and where the hell she got that stun staff. Both of those seem like something a reporter couldn't afford to do, so I kind of wish we got a line of like, oh, I was funneling drug money, or, the Arkhams had a lot of money, so I stole my inheritance or something. Like, anything would have been better than nothing, but like, for that character, I don't know, it's just a fight. I'm not sure if anyone else felt that way regarding Vicky Vale, but unfortunately it's just a case of a really good twist, but not enough substance to back it up. And I'm not going to venture into territory of like, oh, you should have done this. It's just plain fact of the matter is that there were more interesting villains that we could have elevated to that main villain role, and it could have made for a really interesting main narrative. But instead we have a bunch of interesting subplots, and then we kind of deal with a little bit of a lackluster main villain plot. That's all I gotta say about it. So let me know what you think of this. Like I said, this isn't something that I'm expecting to do regularly. I just happened to play through Telltale's Batman Season 1, and I figured, what the hell? I'll talk about the storytelling in it and what I liked and didn't like. So thank you, as always, for watching, and I will see you next week.